Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching Sit Down. Karen Gravano, Karina Seabrook here with us. Families of the Mafia coming to MTV. Nice to meet you both. How are you?
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
So there's a lot to discuss here, and you two have been out front and talking about your family, the Mafia, and what folks should really know about this. So Karen, why don't we start with you? What was most fascinating about putting this together and putting it out on MTV for people to check out?
I think for me, what is really fascinating about this series is that family is the current flow of everything, right? And even though we grew up in a certain type of lifestyle, there are so many relatable stories to everyday life. And everybody really came front and center and told their stories. And being able to do this with the other four families, but my own family was really special to me. My father played a bigger part. He told a lot of his story, and my daughter, she has her own direction and her own story outside of the family history. So that was really kind of special for me to give her a platform to where she's telling her story.
Yeah, no doubt. Karina, I want to bring you in here because you've seen it now with multiple generations and you have your own life as well. So what was most important to you to tell about your story?
I feel like what was most important was being able to have this platform, because I feel like coming from the background and the family last name that I do, a lot of people, they assume or have things to say, but what's important is I'm building my own story and I'm going in a different path that my family did take. I learned from their mistakes and I love my family for who they are, but most importantly, I'm trying to build my own empire and completely going in a different path of, the
Prior ones in the family.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Karen, for you, when you think about your father and just like hearing him talk about his life and his involvement here with the mob, I mean, what was most emotional for you? Because it's one thing to live it, it's another thing to talk about it all these years later.
I think for me to actually hear him tell the story from his point of view, whether it's good, bad, ugly, however people want to view it, it's still what he lived and it's his truths, and he's able to put it out because there's so many misconceptions about what happened in his life. And for him to actually sit down and tell it the way he tells it, he brings you inside that world and lets you see the good, bad, and ugly. Prior to me even getting on TV and telling this story, it was like, there's so much, I want to say, like, attention that goes on the mob, and it's really glamorized and glorified, but yet there's a dark side, right? And families go through struggles when you lose a loved one. So to be able for me to tell that and then hear it coming from my father, the choices that he made, why he got into the mob, and what his beliefs were, it's kind of like I can put everything to perspective in my head. And I'm proud of him for being able to tell his story, and for us to take it in this direction and have a television show to be able to not glorify anything, but really highlight the reality of what happens and how you try to navigate past the past.
The reality is extremely important, right? Because so many folks base it off of The Sopranos, Goodfellas, right? The Godfather movies. And it's like, yeah, there's bits and pieces of that. But Karina, for you, like, we don't get the real about just the emotions of dealing with people always assuming something about your last name or just trying to have your own path. So, what was it like for you to kind of see multiple generations, but also to realize like, hey, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to just have my own situation over here.
So I could thank my family for, kind of keeping me sheltered in a way and shielded from that lifestyle growing up, but also giving me the knowledge that I needed to know. It was real. It was my life. I grew up visiting all the men behind bars. So to me, I didn't, as as my mom grew up with the glitz and glamour and that lifestyle, I kind of grew up with the repercussions of it. And that's what made me realize that I had to, kind of go in a different path that everybody else did and break that chain and go in a positive direction. And people can look at me for Karina Seabrook. People can see me and see a different story and, see I'm in finance, I'm building my own brand. So it's so different than the background that I come from. To me, my family's my family, but people can choose how they look at me, and I want to break that chain.
Karen, what's it like for
It may
you?
come.
Oh, sorry about that, Karina. Karen, what's it like for you to talk to Karina about the glitz and glamour? Because she saw the repercussions of it, right? She wasn't around necessarily for all of that. So what's it like for you, Karen, to see both sides of it now when you reflect on everything?
Sometimes when I reflect back, I look at, like, the good things I had from that lifestyle. And, maybe I want to give Karina some of those same things. But the reality is, you have to balance and be able to show her, like, that wasn't reality, even though it was my reality then. The reality is working hard and really obtaining those things and not having to look over your shoulder or worry about, going to prison or anything like that. So those are just real general conversations that me and Karina would have. I think I was also like an overbearing mother sometimes because I'm always like, don't do this or don't do that. And she's like, I'm not even like that. But I had to let her know what I experienced or things that I've seen, whether I think she's going to make those same mistakes or not, just to let her know that this is what it is. And I think that she did such a great job in just growing into who she is as a woman, and I think sometimes, when you hear a story, like my father's story, that's his story. And because of the last name and everything, it kind of overshadows the family. But each and every one of us have still our own path and our own story to tell. And I think Karina definitely makes that known. And that's something that she really works hard to do, be able to create her own path.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the relationship between mother and daughter is so important just in general, but I would imagine even more so in this situation. So, Karina, what were some of the lessons that your mom taught you just about stuff that she experienced that you didn't necessarily want to experience or that you just needed to know in order to carve out your own path here?
I think the biggest lesson, which pushes me till this day, was seeing my mom always give me a good life. No matter how much she was struggling, she always made it like everything was okay. And her and my grandmother were left to hold down the house and make sure that everything was good when, like I said, all the men were away. So she raised me to be such an independent, hardworking, woman as I'm growing into, and I can't thank her enough for that, because this is something that sticks with me till this day and makes me want to inspire young women to be independent and to understand that they can do it. You know, necessarily like however wherever they come from, no matter what background or whatever it is, they could always get it done regardless on their own.
Yeah, it's really beautifully said. Karen, you've been speaking out about your life and this world for a long time. What were some of the challenges early on in doing that? Because there are a lot of folks that don't feel good about these things being put out there and all the stories being told. So, what have been some of the hardest parts of that?
I grew up in a world that was considered a secret society, right? The only thing you ever knew about it was said in newspapers, and nobody really ever spoke out as we did, coming from, putting it on TV as a reality show. So we weren't putting out anyone's secrets or anything. We're just kind of showing what it's like to go behind closed doors. And it was challenging at first, definitely, because I never even said the word mob growing up. Like, so I remember my first TV interview and people like said, "What is it like growing up in the mob?" And we were all just frozen because, it took us a lot to get comfortable to be able to speak about it. But we're, and the good thing about this series is it's really about family. So yes, we come from a certain kind of lifestyle and we tell what those, mistakes or trials and tribulations are, but it's like, how do you navigate into the right direction? And I think that's really what we're focusing on in this series, is how you go from point A to point C and really change your life.
Karina, what do you think is the biggest misconception for some people about the mob? Because you're from a younger generation. Your mom had a different experience compared to you. I'm sure you get this question a lot, but what do people just assume that just isn't true at all whatsoever?
I mean, to be very honest, it's crazy because I was never like, people would come to me and like be fascinated with the mob, and I'm like, I come from that lifestyle of, family background, and I was never really into it. But I would say a misconception is all these movies. There's movies that, The Sopranos, Goodfellas, and all that. That really is how, they may have been living, but I feel like there's a lot of, it's a little dramatic and dramatized, maybe.
Everything's not happy and, and glitzy and glamorous. There's the
Right.
behind, you know the doors where you are visiting people in prison, or, trying, and I think Karina lived that when I was,
That's the
yeah,
lifestyle
she,
that I grew up seeing and living. So for me, it was like I was dealing with, my father was never really there growing up. So I had to deal with the hardships of that lifestyle and where that gets you. So for me, it was a lesson, but it was also the norm to me. That was just my life.
How about talking with the other families? What was that like for you two? I mean, I'm sure there was a lot that was similar, some stuff that was different. So Karen, why don't you jump in here? What was most fascinating about the other families' experiences?
It's crazy because I didn't know the two new families that we added onto the show. I didn't really know them on a personal level. And then seeing their stories unfold, you do see a lot of similarities, like trying to come out of the shadows of their fathers or, past mistakes. It's like one of the ladies on the show, I see that she loves her husband no matter what. That's her husband, that's the father of her child. And she doesn't believe in divorce. She tries to hold the family together. And then it kind of touched my soul because the way my mother is, my mother held it all together. No matter what, whatever my father did, she was the glue that kept the family together. And her belief was, you just gotta pick up the pieces and like she always said, your father was a great father. He was a great husband. So I see a lot of that being spoke about with, with the other families and kind of my father, when I was a kid, he was my idol. He's my father. He's my protector. He's my provider. And I've seen other people say that about their father on the show. So it's kind of that even though these men were criminals and they were outside doing what they do, they came in the house and, people loved and felt protected and, these men provided for their families. I mean, maybe the way they chose to do it wasn't the best, but they still did it. So we have love for, our families no matter what.
There's so much nuance to that, right? Because some people can't believe that somebody could do both those things, but it's absolutely true that you could be out in the streets doing one thing, but you can come home and be loving and caring and be there for your family. And Karina, like you see this with your grandfather. I'm sure it's really interesting for you seeing him at an older age. What's the craziest part for you when you're like, this is my grandfather, I couldn't imagine him being a certain way? So how do you think through some of these things here?
I always looked at him as I looked past everything, and at the end of the day, he's my grandfather. He's family to me, and people always ask me, "How is he? Is he this? Is he that?" He's funny, and I'm blessed to be able to sit with him now, and that he's home with us, and I go to him for business advice because I'm very big in, like into finance and all that. So for me, I'm just happy that I'm able to build a relationship with him now because the earliest memory I have is him being away. Like I said, he was away my whole life. So I never got to have a relationship with him. But putting all that aside, I just look at him as
A regular person.
that's it.
Yeah, no doubt. Karen, is it more mind blowing for you that your father has spoken about all this or that it's on TV? Like, what blows your mind the most, and just in terms of the whole thing?
I always felt like my father needed to come home and tell his story because the way he tells it is just so powerful. So I think the fact that we're all doing this on a television show together does blow my mind. I never thought my father, he does his podcast and everything, but never thought that he'd be on a TV show with me and my daughter and the rest of my family doing it. So it kind of like sometimes it feels surreal, but we're blessed to have that opportunity to be able to, tell the
Yeah,
story the way it should be.
no doubt about it. I'm sure there's a lot of growth and healing and a lot to be learned from. So, really nice to meet both of you two. Looking forward to watching, and we'll talk to you both down the road, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you for
having us.
having us.